Why are we talking about this? Technology is a big deal. It impacts every area of our life. I don't think that I need to explain that too far, right? And so a few disclaimers up front. Number one, this is a massive topic, okay? There is no way that the two of us can cover everything that could be covered in regards to technology. And also know that we are still figuring out what is the best way to use some of these tools, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of our families. So we're a work in progress trying to figure out how to engage with these things just as much as you are. But I do want you to know this up front. Okay, we are not advocating getting rid of all technology and returning to the quote-unquote good old days when there weren't phones and there weren't all these distractions, okay? We'll talk about the rate of change that's happened in the technological world, but we actually are very pro-technology. We like technology. There's a lot of ways that technology is helpful to us and a lot of ways that we interact with it on a daily basis. But if I kind of walk you back in history a little bit, when I was growing up, the best technology that I had was one of these guys right here. And I love the old Nintendo 64, right? I spent a lot of time playing the Nintendo 64, right? Whether it was Mario Kart, little Star Fox, Zelda, Madden, whatever it was, right? We spent a lot of time growing up playing with technology, playing with the Nintendo 64. When I was 10 years old, the very first version of this device came out, and this was the original iPod. Now, the battery on this, you wouldn't believe how long it lasted. It lasted for days, right? Your iPhones today are a little embarrassing as far as comparing the battery life, but we used to load music on there, and that was a big deal back when I was a kid. Now, when I was a junior in high school, that's when the iPhone itself was released, okay? So I've kind of grown up now, gone into adulthood with an iPhone. I really like my iPhone, things I love doing on my iPhone. I'm a big Twitter guy. I like Twitter, so spend a lot of time on there. But mainly in this season of my life, the thing I enjoy the most about my phone is that I can always be in touch with my 7-month-old son, Caleb. There he is. Video from last week. We were FaceTiming. I was at a conference, and I love being able to get updates and see him right there on my screen. And so we're very pro-technology. What about you, Mr. Stabler? What do you like?
Well, I like technology, too. I'm the old guy, so I go way back. The first piece of technology that really changed my life was a lot different. It was this, and this is incredibly awesome. This is what we call a Pac-Man watch from 1982. It actually had a little joystick on the side that you could pull off and insert and play Pac-Man. It was fantastic. And so this began my long love affair with little watches. This one may not seem like much to you, but this was unbelievable because in college I was able to use this watch, yes, to tell time, but also to store 50 phone numbers right on my watch. Anybody's phone number that I wanted to look up, it could be right there. Unbelievable. That's 1993 if you're doing the tracking on that. And then fast forward to today, and just like Mr. Thomas loves his iPhone, I really enjoy my Apple Watch. Now, as we're thinking about technology, we are on the edge of something that's really unprecedented in the history of the world, and I don't know if you can fully appreciate that. There have been major technological advances that changed culture in ways where we could never go back that have happened in the past. The automobile is one of those. In the United States, you may not realize this, but the interstate system did that. But these things happened over long periods of time, and they were not all at once. Mr. Thomas just said this iPhone revolution took place in 2007, and here we are just a decade later, and things are totally different. That's unprecedented in the history of the world. And that's why you're feeling some of the pressures as I've talked with many of you. And you also probably have this sense that old people don't get it. Here's why. This is a quote from the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And here's what it says. First, everything that's already in the world when you're born is just normal. For you guys, cell phones are just normal. Then anything that gets invented between then and before you turn 30 is incredibly exciting and creative, and with any luck you can make a career out of it, Mr. Thomas in the iPhone. Finally, anything that gets invented after you're 30 is against the natural order of things, and it's the beginning of the end of civilization as we know it, which is probably how you feel some of the adults around you feel about technology, until it's been around for about 10 years when it gradually turns out to be all right already and grandma's on Facebook. And so that's kind of the pattern that we see as we're moving through technology. But what I've found out is that you guys do have some concerns. You remember I gave you a survey, and that was really important to me to understand, how do you think about technology? What are some of your concerns? What are the ways that you are using technology? And then I followed that up. I interviewed several of you in this room, and those interviews were very fascinating to me to hear what was going on. And the thing that we're seeing here is that in order for us to handle technology well, we're going to have to take some time to really think about it and to gain wisdom.
So as Mr. Stabler mentioned, there's something unique about this moment. In previous topics, previous generations, we could kind of trust those who have gone before us to impart wisdom to us on how life works and how to go about our daily lives. The problem is technology is advancing at such a rapid speed, there's nobody before us to show us the way to go. And so what we need to do in this chapel series, what we're trying to do, is not give you a list of do's and don'ts. We are not going to give you a packet that says, here's how to use your smartphone, here's what you should avoid, here's what you should do with it, okay? That's going to be really unhelpful for you. Number one, because of that rate of change of technology and how much it is evolving over time. But secondly, this is really personalized to each and every one of you. All of you have a different engagement with the devices in your life. All of you have a different engagement with your phones if you have a phone, right? And so what we really need to try to land at in this series, in the next 3 weeks, what we're going to spend time talking about, is how can we engage the technology in our lives, the devices in our lives, the phones in our lives with wisdom. Wisdom is really what we are aiming at here. How can we exercise wisdom in engaging with the things that we are technologically with every single day? So to do that, we're going to do 3 weeks. This week, we're beginning with the question, where are we? So can we situate ourselves in our technological moment right now? What's going on with our engagement with our phones, with our devices right now in this moment? Next week, we're going to talk about where we are going. Technology has a built-in trajectory to it. It's taking us somewhere. And by the way, that's the very design of God himself. And so we're going to look at God's design for technology next week and talk about how we can participate in that trajectory moving forward. And then lastly, we want to talk about how do we get there? How do we, with wisdom, implement some practical guidelines in our engagement with technology so that we can be following that trajectory in a way that doesn't ruin us, but allows us to engage in God's idea for technology. So we're beginning this week with where exactly are we in this?
Now, you're probably wondering about that survey. What were the results of that survey? And we're going to share a little bits of that with you today and probably some in the next few weeks. But there were a few things that we were able to deduce. One was something that I think, knew to start off with, and that is that our phones are really with us pretty much wherever we go. When you leave in the morning, you take your phone with you. When you go to bed at night, it's probably right there with you. Almost everyone said that their phone is with them a lot. Not only that, but because we have our phones with us so frequently, many of you that I spoke with, and the survey bears this out, expect that your friends will answer the text and the social media things that you send, and that you have the feeling that you should be available for them as well. And I talked to several of you who felt like even late at night that if there was a text that you received or a Snapchat or something like that, that you ought to respond to that. And that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but we have this feeling that I need to be responding all the time, that I'm constantly in connection with other people. And not only that, some of you get worried if your phone's not with you. Now, some of that was because if you don't have your phone, that means maybe you lost it and mom and dad are going to kill you. But it also is just this sense of I'm lacking something. You probably can identify with that. You ever check your pocket and think, oh, my phone's not here. It's like your whole day is going to be different. That tells us something about the power of these devices over us.
I literally yesterday lost my phone in my classroom. Mr. Stabler watched me freak out about it for a minute, so I know the feeling very well in that.
I took it.
He did take it. That was part of the reason why. Now, we also asked, how frequently do you check your social media accounts, okay? Let's look particularly at the green, the blue, and the purple kind of parts of the pie chart here. Parts of the pie chart, it's hard to say, by the way. So the green here, this is 25 to 50 times a day you're checking your social media. That's 28%. 14% were saying that they check their social media between 50 and 100 times a day. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Snapchat is probably responsible for that. And then the purple 6% say that they check their social media over 100 times a day. That means 50% of you in this room are checking your social media feeds 25 to 100 times a day. That's a lot, isn't it? That's forming a lot of who we are as human beings. And so we check our phones, our social media accounts a lot. By the way, it's not even how often you check your phone, just your social media. So there's a lot going on there. But then we ask the question, do you think that all of that social media is actually having a positive impact on the lives of teenagers, of the lives of your peers? And the biggest chunk here was this green, and this green is neutral. And that neutral, I've been taking that to mean I don't know. There's some good things about it. I have a lot of fun. I stay up to date. There's things I really enjoy on there, but there's also things I don't like. There's things I'm not really sure what to do with. So the biggest chunk here answered neutral, whether this is having a positive effect. Then we made it a little more personal. Does social media actually increase your happiness? And again, overwhelmingly, the neutral responded with the most. So is social media actually delivering on what it promises? And you guys are kind of saying, I don't really know. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't, but I'm unsure about how this is actually affecting me. And I think that led some of you in some of this idea that you have to always be available. You answered this statement here. I often wish I could get rid of my phone so that I wouldn't always have to respond to people. A lot of you said yes. The 15% is strongly agree, the 20% agree, 30% is neutral. There's a lot up there on the agree category. So a lot of you guys are approaching this like Ron Swanson when he takes his phone out and just tries to destroy it in front of Tom, right? If you think, man, if I could just get rid of this phone, life would be better. So that's some of the data that we discovered on this. And so now Mr. Stabler is going to give us a helpful metaphor to think about this a little more.
Well, yeah, it's not realistic, is it, to just get rid of all of our devices? We might like to do that, but instead we need to think about how do we use these devices with wisdom. And to help us think through that, I want to go back to a very ancient sort of technology. You can see hanging out there in midair is a shovel. Why do we have a picture of a shovel? Well, I want you to consider what a shovel can do. A shovel is a piece of technology. It can drastically change the landscape around us. I know this well because when my son was in K4, I gave him a shovel to go dig in the yard. I expected a little hole somewhere. The next thing I know, I walk outside and I see he's gone below the surface of the ground, dirt's flying up, and there's this huge hole that he put in our backyard. You can change a lot with a shovel, but the shovel, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, and this is a very important point, the shovel also changes you. Think about it. When you use a shovel, if you use it frequently, it begins to change your musculature. You should get stronger and you should develop. Your body will change. Maybe if you've not used the shovel very frequently and you use it all at once, you'll get blisters on your hands. The shovel has a profound effect on you. And if you extend that idea and you start thinking about that, here's what you'll realize. The shovel is a physical tool, and so the effect that it has on us is physical. The phone, however, we use it to accomplish all kinds of things that are non-physical. Therefore, the effect of that tool on us will be in the non-physical realm. Have you ever thought about that? What is your phone doing to you? We use it all the time to shape our environment, but we would be foolish if we did not realize it is shaping us in some pretty profound ways. And so this morning, we want to think about 3 ways. These are not the only 3 ways, but at least 3 different ways that our phone is shaping us. The first you can see up there is distractions. We know this. We know that our phone distracts us. I want you to think about what it would be like for someone from the past to come enter into our experience and to watch people walking around with phones all the time. And to help us understand what it might appear like to them, a photographer did something that was very clever. A photographer took pictures of people who were in normal, everyday settings with each other, but removed the phones. And all of a sudden, we have this sense that this is kind of ridiculous. I mean, here we have people who are interacting with each other, or are they? And you have probably experienced something like this yourself, that as you're speaking with someone and that device is out, you feel like you're somehow not really connected. In fact, a very famous sociologist named Sherry Turkle has done some study on this, and she says that what phones do to in-person conversations is a problem. Studies show that the mere presence of a phone on a table, even a phone turned off, changes what people talk about. If we think we might be interrupted, we keep conversations light on topics of little controversy or consequence. And conversations with phones on the landscape block empathetic connection. That means we don't care about each other as much with the mere presence of a phone. If two people are speaking and there's a phone on a nearby desk, each feels less connected to the other than when there is no phone present. Even a silent phone disconnects us. And this is something that we would expect from Scripture. Here, the Apostle John talks about how he desires to come see these people. He wants to see them face to face. Not only that, phones distract us from doing the things that are important. We like to multitask. In fact, the brain conference that I just went to in Boston, which had some of the leading psychologists and researchers in the world present there, said that teenagers believe they can do up to 7 different tasks at the same time. But the reality is that nobody can actually multitask. We switch from one task to the other very quickly, but we cannot do 2 things at once. And when we multitask, it degrades whatever we are doing. We do not do any of those things as well as we might. And so we must think about, how is the phone shaping us in terms of doing the things that we want to do? You guys have experienced this. I know you have, because I have too. Something very important needs to be done, and I'm finding that my devices are causing me to focus on something very unimportant. Haven't you experienced that? And then you kick yourself later. Why did I not do those things that I needed to do? The last thing is this, that our phones sometimes take us away from enjoying the present moment around us. Here we have a very popular formula, and I talked to some of you about this, the girls jumping on the beach. We know what went into this. Probably an hour of taking pictures to get just the right one, during which time their enjoyment for the space around them, for the waves, for the sand, for the beautiful day decreased so that they could show that they were having a good time. Do you see how distracting our phones can be?
Well, next observation that we want to make is this idea of consuming. How much are we consuming with our phones nowadays? Well, did some research on that to ask, how long are we actually spending in front of a glowing rectangle a day? Okay, so last year CNN released a report on a study that they had done. So this was a year ago, so the numbers could be even more than what I'm about to share. But the average American adults spend close to 11 hours a day in front of a screen of some kind. Okay? And that's also why I imagine some of you might even be frustrated with your parents a little bit, right? Like, they seem to be spending just as much time as I do on phone and technology and things like that. Young adults, 18 to 24, are spending on average about 4 hours a day looking at their smartphone. Okay? So we are consuming at a rate that's pretty incredible if we think about it. We are almost super consumers of technology. And part of the problem with this is that we have a hard time stopping, and it can become very addictive because of the way the technologies themselves are built. So think about it. How many apps on your phone actually have a bottom to them? You know what I mean by that? Like, if you get on Instagram, if you get on Twitter, if you get on your news app, you can scroll, and will you ever make it to the bottom? No, right? It's endless. You just keep scrolling, keep scrolling. There's a lack of something called stopping cues, right? So stopping cues used to be built into all parts of our society. If you were reading a newspaper, you could read all the way through, but eventually you had to stop. If you're reading a book, you come to the end of a chapter, you're presented with the choice. Do I keep reading or do I stop? If you go watch the movies, right, or go watch a TV show, it used to stop at a particular time, and then you'd come back the next week and watch it again. But now in our world that is full of Netflix, for example, Netflix, who knows this reality, has now built in, if you're watching Parks and Rec here, the keep watching feature, right? Where it automatically rolls the next 2 to 3 to 4 episodes before it actually asks you if you are still watching. So the technologies themselves lack these stopping cues, and it only increases our consumption of the technologies themselves. Think about your push notifications as well. Right, you know what's happening when you get a push notification, and why Mr. Stabler just described that distraction that happens even when your phone's face down? Because when you see a push notification, it sends a shot of dopamine to your brain. There's a little something that hits you in that moment, okay? And so this idea of getting notifications all day long, it's affecting our brain, it's affecting the way that we go about our lives, and it certainly is affecting our interaction with our phones and with our technologies. That reality that dopamine rushes to us whenever we check our push notifications or when something lights up on our screen explains this, doesn't it? It explains why we check our social media so often, but it also explains this reality that we're not really sure if it's good, that we're not really sure if it makes me happy because it's not leading to contentment, right? It's a quick fix, but it's not leading us to feel content with where we are at. Now, think about your phone for just a minute, okay? Traveled to a conference last week. Think about all that your phone can do. So I was just thinking back over my trip to Memphis, and I was thinking about all the ways I used this phone on my trip. Okay, I used it as maps. I used it to search for restaurants and good food and coffee shops. I used it as a credit card. I used Apple Pay to check out. I used it as my airplane ticket. I used it to listen to music and podcasts. I used it as an alarm clock in the morning. I played some games on it when I was bored. I stayed in touch with others. I posted on social media. I FaceTimed with my son. That's all in this little tiny rectangle. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? I mean, think 20 years ago, you would have needed a separate item or a separate technology to accomplish all of that. So that's, again, getting at this rate that technology is advancing and evolving in our lives. But I think if we're not careful, we need to think about what that's actually doing to us. Because although it can do all of those things, we also are processing all sorts of different kinds of information all in one place. And that's unique to our moment in human history. So think about what you use your social media for. Here's what you guys responded. Overwhelmingly, you use it for friends, to connect with them. You use it for entertainment. You use it for news, more than to connect with family. Probably a separate conversation there. But anyways, you use it for news, use it for family, and you use it to express your personal views. The problem is, if you go to your push notifications, right, you've got reminders, you've got emails, you've got news updates, you've got Snapchats, and they're all in the exact same place, and we struggle with how to exercise wisdom in interpreting all that information. That leads to a phenomenon that people are calling right now infotainment, where our news has basically turned into entertainment. And we have trouble deciphering between the two, and now news outlets are having to break the newest story as fast as they can, and it turns more into entertainment. Literally, with a swipe of the finger, I can switch between Twitter, my Bible app, my email, and Flappy Golf. Have we ever thought about what that is doing to us? And so this immediate kind of craving for approval, gratification right off the bat, it causes us to lose the ability to reflect. It causes us to lose the ability to meditate, to think. And you know what else it really infringes on is our prayer life. Right? My generation and younger is in a prayer crisis because of the technology in our lives, because we can't stop to reflect, we can't stop to think, we can't stop to meditate, and ultimately, we're not stopping to rest. Right? If we are on our phones right before we go to bed, it's the first thing that we pick up when we wake up, we are not really resting. We're not able to find that rest. So our constant consumption in front of screens is leaving us a little bit restless. It's leaving us tired. The screens are not able to engage us in the way that we are hoping.
So we've said that our devices are shaping us by distracting us. They're shaping us by causing us to constantly consume things. They're also shaping our relationships. And here we talk about mediated relationships. We are designed, and this is God's good design, to be people with physical bodies who are in each other's presence. One physical body in the presence of another. We communicate a great deal by our physical bodies. We actually learn through our physical bodies in ways that are really unique. And the scriptures understand that. That's why there's so many verses in the Bible about being face-to-face. God talks about speaking with Abraham face-to-face. God talks about being in judgment face-to-face. Actually, the apostles talk about wanting to be face-to-face with each other. Being in the physical presence of another person is the way that we relate best. And when we insert a device in that, it's not a bad thing. I'm very happy that I was able to communicate with my 2-year-old when I was in Boston last week. That was an amazing thing for me to be able to do and for her to have relationship with me. However, the presence of that device between us makes it more difficult for us to relate, and I'm going to argue that it causes us to love, to be more difficult for us to love. And I think you can see this in this verse here in 1 John. Notice what the verse says. He who does not love his brother whom he has seen, see, that should be the easy thing because you've seen this person, you're physically present, cannot love God whom he has not seen. What is implied there? That when we don't see someone, it becomes more difficult for us to love them well. That's why when we get to the end of all things, we will be face to face with God. Now, what does that mean in the meantime? It means that we must be very careful, because when we use a device, we are going to find a decrease in empathy. Think about the most intimate experience that you can have in terms of communication on a device. It's probably FaceTime. And if you look at this girl on the screen behind us, it appears as if we're making eye contact with her, doesn't it? But the reality is that if we see what she sees, because she's using the phone and she's seeing her two friends, where are their eyes? Are they making eye contact with her? No, they cannot, because they have a choice. They can either look at the screen, the image of her, in which case their eyes will be averted, or they can look into that little black dot that is the camera to make it appear as if they're making eye contact, but they can't make eye contact. You can't make eye contact through a screen. And that means there's a diminishment in our relationships. And what does that lead to? It leads us then to not care as much as we should. We see somebody's having a bad day and they actually have the audacity to post it on social media, and we find ourselves saying, I don't care about that. Please don't pollute my news feed. I mean, really. And not only that, but we can find ourselves saying things that we would never say in person. Many of you that I interviewed agreed to that. I will say things through a device that I would never say in person. You guys, I was encouraged by this stat that you overwhelmingly want to be in the physical space of another person when you're talking with them. But there were certain scenarios that when it came to relationships that were potentially more awkward and more emotionally charged, we want to create that distance. And I think that's something we've got to work against, that awkwardness is very important. And perhaps the most concerning of all the statistics that I saw on here was this, that when we have a mediated device, it can cause us to view another person as an object. To put this quite bluntly, I don't know of many guys who would walk up to a girl and say, will you please remove your clothes so that I can look at you? They would not do that. But as soon as we insert a device, it somehow becomes acceptable. Well, where do we go from all of this?
So that's a snapshot of where we are. I imagine you resonated with some of those summaries, some of those statistics. But what do we do with all this? We need to begin to think again in that conversation of wisdom. And to help us land at wisdom here, I want to look at what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6, an incredibly helpful verse for technology and our devices. Paul says here, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Two observations right off the bat there. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. Maybe a good question to ask in our engagement with our phones is this helpful? Right? I could pursue this all day long, but is it actually helpful, my engagement with my phone? But secondly, maybe more uncomfortably, are we exercising control over our phones and our devices, or is it the other way around? Is the device exercising control over us? Because see, when our values are used in a way that, or our values are over the device and we're using the device as a tool, similar to a shovel, right? When we know what we believe and then we use the device to help accomplish something, great good can come. That's happening right now in this chapel, right? We're recording this chapel. Theoretically, the reach of this message could go much further than this room. We like to connect in relationships with people online. Right, we're able to do that in an incredible way. Also, it's just kind of fun sometimes, right? We get enjoyment from being on our phones. We get enjoyment from the things that we use our phones to do. But I think the more uncomfortable question we have to ask is that actually happening, or is it the other way around? Is the phone dominating us? And is the phone shaping our values? And not just our values, because the values are an expression of our loves. Is the phone dictating our loves? Is the phone dictating our worship? Or are we able to use the phones truly as a device? I think that's something we need to wrestle with through these 3 weeks.
And maybe one question that is even beyond that is, has the phone actually become the thing that we love? Again, think of the person from the past who comes to the present and sees people carrying lovingly around all of these devices with them all the time. What would they conclude? That must be something religious. I think it would be hard for them to think otherwise. And so we must ask the question, has the phone so captured my heart that it now is the thing that I love? Think of the incredible promises that a phone makes. The phone makes the promise that I can always be heard, that any time of day I can go to this device and I'll be heard, or that I can be present anywhere, or that I can speak and things happen. And we just expect that I can say something and something is accomplished in the world by my phone. And so these promises grab our hearts, and we think maybe this is where fullness of joy lies. Actually, I don't think we think it, we feel it. And I want you to consider for a second the reality that there is one who meets, these are not true. These promises are not true. But I want you to think about our Heavenly Father who comes to us through His Son, and how these change when we think about Jesus Christ coming to us. First of all, we know that you can actually always be heard. It's not through social media, but it's through the one who says, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you, that you have a Savior who listens to you all the time. Not only that, you can always be in His presence. Now, we can't be in the presence of every person all the time, but we can be in the presence of our Savior. He is with us. And then this last step is an important one. I am not the one who speaks and it happens. He's the one who's spoken and it happens. And I think there is the crux of the matter. Do I want to be the God of my life, or do I want to yield myself to the one who has said that He will love me every step of the way and allow Him to be the one whom I worship? And so as we think about this, we want to conclude with something really important here and become very practical. And I think Mr. Thomas is going to lead us through some considerations here that we would like you to not just walk away from chapel and say, hey, well, that was interesting, but we want you to do something.
Yeah, we don't want you just to sit, listen, think that's good information, and then do nothing with it, which is what our phones sort of are leading us to do sometimes. So and we're going to try to do this every week. We're going to have a challenge, and we're going to have some questions for you to think about. Okay, so we're getting ready to go on Thanksgiving break. I know we're all excited about the whole week off. That allows us to have some little different rhythms in our schedule, and we want to challenge you to think about how you want to use that time. So 2 challenges. You ready? Number 1, we want you to spend 30 minutes alone without your phone in reflection, thought, prayer, meditation. Can you just set the phone aside, go somewhere alone, spend 30 minutes, kind of get out of the technological world and just think, just reflect. Maybe there's something big going on in your life. Maybe there's something big that you're wrestling with. Maybe you just need to get alone and reflect. Get out of the echo chamber that can be our phones and just think for a little bit. Secondly, a lot of you are going to be spending time with family this week, Thanksgiving, friends when you're off from school. Our challenge to you is to spend an hour in conversation with a friend or family member over the break with your phone turned all the way off, because remember, it distracts us even when we're looking at it face down.
All the way off.
Right? All the way off.
All the way off.
In another room. Okay, so 30 minutes on your own, thinking, reflecting, praying, meditating, and an hour in conversation with another human being without any devices. Okay? Now, questions we want you to think about, and I think these will be helpful for you as we continue on in this series. Okay, 3 questions. Number 1, how are your devices shaping you? How are your devices shaping you? How is it informing your values and your loves? Number 2, what concerns do you have about your devices? Maybe that's what you spend your time thinking about. What bothers you about your phone? What gets you irritated? What gets you frustrated? What concerns do you have? And then number 3, what should you change? What should you change? Our goal in this series would be that we engage these devices, we engage technology, we engage our phones, we engage social media, all that comes with that, with wisdom, and sometimes that's going to require a change. I know for me it's required a change in my engagement with it over the past 6 months or so. So that is our challenge. That is some questions to think about. You can get your phone out, snap a picture if you'd like to remember it. It's right there for you. But as we close out, I want to pray for us. So let me pray, then you can snap the picture, and you can head on your way. Lord, thank you so much for this time. God, thank you for the technologies that you have given us. I pray that you would allow these students, God, us as a school, to think with wisdom, to be able to engage these devices in a helpful manner that they do not dominate us, Lord. So give us wisdom, give us help on that. Allow us to see things clearly in our own lives. God, sometimes the phones blind us and distract us. So may you pull back the curtain on that, and may we rightly analyze what these phones are doing to us. And God, may you use these technologies and use these devices in a way that points us to the gospel and points us to Christ. So Lord, we need your help to do that, and we invite that right now. And we ask that all in Jesus' name. Amen.